On Thursday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill to suspend trade with Russia, as well as ban the importation of Russian oil. So now this bill actually follows the Senate passing the measure 100-0. So understand, in the House, it got 418 votes and 100-0 in the Senate. Overwhelmingly bipartisan. And essentially, of course, it's to punish Russia for their invasion into Ukraine. So now, there were House Republicans that decided to vote against this bill for what they say are varying reasons, but I think I'm going to speculate into what I believe the reasons are, at least for Marjorie Taylor Greene. In fact, you had Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Andy Biggs, Paul Gosar, Warren Davidson, Scott Perry, Matt Gaetz, Thomas Massie, and Thomas Massie. And so those Republicans were like, no, we would still like to do trade with Russia, and we would still like to do importation of Russian oil. Interesting. So now, Gaetz and Massie and Greene specifically cited the Maginski Act as the reason they pushed against this bill. In fact, the Maginski Act, if you're not familiar, is a law that empowers the federal government to sanction entities deemed to be violating human rights. In fact, it was used against certain Russian oligarchs before. In fact, there was a discussion about this all the way back in 2016, where some Russian lobbyists were coming through and speaking to Trump Tower, the infamous Trump Tower meeting, about why they should remove the Maginski Act, because there are certain Russian oligarchs that had been sanctioned by that over their role in doing some pretty bad things. Let's just say that. There were naughty boys and girls over there in Russia supporting some very bad things. Now, that said, here's what Marjorie Taylor Greene had said. I'm sorry, this is what Massie had said in a statement to Insider. Quote, extending the already overly broad executive powers in the Maginski Act forever is legislative malpractice. You know what legislative malpractice actually is? It's basically taking a piece of legislation that is immensely popular with the American people and would be good for the American people, like Build Back Better, and tanking it, not passing it. Taking something that is incredibly helpful, popular with the American people, and not doing it. That's legislative malpractice, okay? And Republicans and corporate Democrats, by the way, engage in that all the time. Now, both Greene and Gaetz explained their votes on Twitter. In fact, here's what Matt Gaetz said. President Biden should not have a blank check to sanction whoever he deems a human rights violator. Really? Well, that means, by the way, if Biden gets that power, well, then the next president will also have that power. So, do you think about that at all? Because if that happens, and by the way, that is kind of the problem sometimes, where you have these executive powers that are given to the president and are never given back. And when a Republican administration takes over, oftentimes they abuse that power. And so, look, that's actually a legitimate concern, not from Matt Gaetz, but overall, when you give more executive power. That said, I do believe that in the spirit of the law, you have the Russians that are engaging, and I should say the Russian military that is engaging in war crimes, in human rights abuses. And I think that is important to point out. Now, the bill, which still passed with 418 votes, as I mentioned, will empower the State Department to collect evidence and begin investigating allegations of Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Now, Greene, however, claimed that H.R. 7276 would hand over authority to our intelligence and would hand over authority and our intelligence to the ICJ and ICC, the international courts, Now, why would you be against that? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene says that it would put our military on trial. Quote, I will not vote for globalism and the slow slide to become a one-world government. I will only vote to protect America, our military, and our borders. Also,
Nancy Pelosi's gazpacho police.
Yeah, she's not in favor of that, though. Not at all. So what does that mean, essentially? Well, okay. Basically, it means that she's totally fine with Russia not being held accountable for war crimes. But it also means that she's fine with the United States not being held accountable for war crimes. And I think this is very important. And I think this is very relevant as well. Because do you think the International Criminal Court hasn't pointed out that the United States has also committed some war crimes? So if you're actually, if somehow this bill, which is set to become law, President Biden's going to sign it, if they inadvertently give the ICC power to go after US's war crimes, I think that's a good thing. I think that our military should be held accountable for any war crimes or potential war crimes that we may commit into the future, as well as things that happened in the past. I think that's great. If they inadvertently did that without thinking about it, you know what? All the better. All the better. That said, we have done war crimes, and let me give you some examples, right? The collateral murder video in Iraq, that was leaked by whistleblower Chelsea Manning, where, yes, our own chopper pilots targeted and killed civilians, including first responders and journalists. So that's very important, okay? Now, just in general terms, we also have enhanced interrogation, of which the international community has considered to be, again, war crimes, torture, extraordinary renditions, the numerous massacres that the United States had done in places like Vietnam, Korea, etc. And so, look, if the ICC wants to take the military to task over that and actually do some accountability, I'm all for it. Wonderful. Hey, congratulations, Congress. You might have actually done something, maybe unintentionally, fantastic. But at the same time, right, you also have Russia. So now Russia has been credibly accused of war crimes during its invasion of Ukraine. And so understand that that's generally the main thing that they're trying to address here in this bill. And so the sanctions against oil and against Russian oligarchs make sense. It makes a ton of sense. And by the way, banning the importation of Russian oil, that actually also, at least if you're coming at it from the conservative talking point side, right? Well, wouldn't that, by extension, help domestic oil production? Is Marjorie Taylor Greene voting against American energy and voting to import more Russian oil? Now, of course, I say that from the conservative side because we know in reality there's no such thing as American energy. There's no such thing as energy independence, right? At least when it comes to fossil fuels. Now, energy independence when it comes to solar, nuclear, wind, all that, geothermal, etc. Yes, those are ways that we can be energy independent away from fossil fuels, away from Saudi Arabia, Russia, all these other oil-producing countries, like in the global south, for example. So now, that said, the reason I say no energy independence with fossil fuels is because oil companies and gas companies are multinational. They owe no allegiance to any company. None at all. And so they take that oil, they take it out of our ground, and they go and they sell it in the world market. Now, what Joe Biden could do is that he could restrict export of oil produced here. Now, he's not going to do that because that would impact oil company profits, and we can't have that. Now, on that, do you ever see any Republicans saying the same thing? Do you ever see them saying, oh, we should restrict our oil exports, to other countries and keep the energy that keep the oil companies from selling to other countries, right? So that we can lower the gas prices here. No, you don't see that. You don't see that at all. Now, either Marjorie Taylor Greene on this issue, and in just like many other issues, is deeply unintelligent, or she is corrupt. I mean, it could be both, really. But let's go to the corruption angle, right? Because I think this is really interesting. So now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I've talked about this before. Do you remember when she purchased defense contractor stock right before calling out war profiteering? Literally engaging in war profiteering and then complaining about war profiteering? She purchased between $1,001 and $15,000 in Lockheed Martin stock on February 22nd, 2022. A day later, she said this, quote, "War and rumors of war is incredibly profitable and convenient." Yes, you would know. And just like that, the media now has a lie to use as the reason for our shattered economy and out-of-control inflation. What a sad existence it must be to shill for globalism and America last, politicians. Now, again, that was right after, that was a day after she bought defense contractor stock, in 2 days before Russia launched her invasion of Ukraine. And since then, by the way, speaking of that stock in Lockheed Martin, guess what? The Biden administration has sent billions of dollars to Ukraine so that the Ukrainians can turn around and spend that money on what? Weapon systems. Not weapon systems that they need to defend themselves, obviously. So now they're turning around, and guess what they're doing? They are purchasing weapons like Lockheed Martin's Javelin missile systems. The sales of that and the stock related to giving all this money to Ukraine to turn around and buy these weapons, what does that do to the stock price? Makes it go up. It makes Marjorie Taylor Greene richer. It's almost as if she's a, wait for it, war profiteer. Huh. Now, what's interesting here, getting back to the oil, and the oil that she is totally fine with importing from Russia. You realize that oil is actually one of the things, since, again, Russia is a petrol state, that is keeping the Russian economy afloat. Amid all of these different punishing sanctions, oil sales are keeping the Russian economy going so that they can continue this war in Ukraine. Now, if we ban the oil sales, which we should have done a long time ago, but I'm glad we're actually trying to do it now, well, that's going to hurt Russia. That's going to hurt the Russian economy, and hopefully that's going to convince Putin to pull back and end this disastrous war and actually come to a peace agreement with the Ukrainians. Again, we want peace to happen, and these economic tools are the ways in which we could pressure them into doing so. Now, that would be nice, right? However, Marjorie Taylor Greene, well, and the defense industry, by the way, overall, well, what would happen if there were a peace agreement? If we stopped needing to give money to Ukraine to turn around and buy these weapons? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene and everybody else invested would start losing money. They wouldn't make any more money, would they? And maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe. Somehow, I'm not entirely sure. Again, there are Republicans who are all about the money, and corporate Democrats as well, and they just look out for their investments. But I think with Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's a little bit different. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene literally really does want the United States to be a lot more like Russia. Run by an authoritarian, backed by oligarchs, and the Christian church, where gay people are heavily oppressed, trans people are oppressed, the media is run by the state on behalf of just Vladimir Putin, and their political opponents die under mysterious circumstances. I don't know. It seems like it. Green Gozar and Gaetz, definitely. And I'm sure many others would also like to live under that system, so long as Trump or someone like him were in charge of it. Or I guess as long as they're in charge of it. Fascism, understand, is one of the trademarks of being in the modern far right.